Plain Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Port. Coming up later in the show, Congressman Kelly Armstrong joins me to take listener questions. He answered questions about, well, all sorts of things, border funding and the chances that it could pull funding away from military projects here in North Dakota, as well as a recent report about his financial background. Representative Armstrong has been associated with the oil industry for a long time. It's his family business. He's also got personal investments in oil wells across the state. And some are questioning that, given his participation in a committee in Washington, D.C. on climate change. In fact, the North Dakota Democrats sent out a press release this week criticizing Congressman Armstrong over that. But, I mean, that interests me. If we're going to have a debate over an area of policy like climate change, shouldn't somebody with a background in the oil and gas industry be involved in that? I mean, if we're going to debate agriculture policy, would we not want farmers involved in it? I think sometimes our Democratic friends, our liberal friends, think that any involvement in, evil, quote-unquote, big oil is in it of itself disqualifying, which is unfortunate. But later in the show, you can hear Congressman Armstrong's response to that. Something I want to talk about is a bill that passed in the state legislature this week. It's Senate Bill 2304, and essentially what it does is it allows local governments to levy their own fines for traffic violations. So currently, the state sets fines for things like speeding, and local governments are not allowed to exceed that. But they've wanted to for a while. In fact, they have in the past and got into some legal hot water over it. But now they want to enforce these local ordinances. And, well, the legislature has decided to give them the permission to do so. The House passed Senate Bill 2304. It now goes to Governor Burgum's desk. We'll see whether or not he signs it. I suspect he probably will. But I don't know. Maybe he'll surprise me. I will say I don't necessarily have a problem with local governments levying their own fines in this area. It's an area where we could probably allow some local control. That's probably fair. And, if Fargo has a problem with speeding and Fargo wants to increase the fines for speeding in order to, correct that problem, hey, maybe that's okay. And maybe we don't need a statewide hike in the speeding fines because Fargo has a problem. And so we have to raise the fines everywhere. Right? I mean, that's fine. I think it's great most of the time if we allow flexibility in policy making like that. Here's my problem, though. There was a state representative, Mary Adams. You might remember her if you read the blog, sayanythingblog.com. She's the Grand Forks Democrat who's been, posting the Hitler memes lately, right? Comparing President Trump to Hitler and just posting a lot of ugly juvenile stuff. Anyway, Representative Mary Adams carried this bill to the floor out of committee, and during her remarks in support of the bill, she said, I quote, "There will be much talk about how the cities are trying to raise revenue, but that is not true. This is truly a safety issue," is what she said. I mangled there a little bit, but that's essentially saying it's about safety, it's not about revenue. Well, here's the thing. If that was true, then why didn't we make the situation for local fines the same as they are for state fines? Article 9, Section 2 of the North Dakota Constitution states that, I quote, "All fines and fees for violation of state laws must be faithfully used and applied each year for the benefit of the common schools of the state, and no part of the fund must ever be diverted, even temporarily, from this purpose or used for any other purpose other than the maintenance of common schools as provided by law." Now, there's statute as well, which codifies this a little bit further. Section 29-27-02.1 of the North Dakota Century Code states, I quote, "All statutory fees, fines, forfeiture, and pecuniary penalties prescribed for a violation of state laws when collected must be paid into the treasury of the proper county to be added to the state school fund." The state school fund, of course, being the Common Schools Trust Fund, much in the news lately because of an allocation issue in the treasurer's office in transferring oil tax revenues to that fund, but I digress. Essentially what happens is the state constitution and state statute says that law enforcement doesn't necessarily get to keep, or even the local governing entity like the local sheriff's office or the local police department or the local municipality, they don't get to keep the revenues from their fines. That was the old way of doing things, right? The state set the fines, and if you violated the fines, then that revenue went to the state. If it's not about revenue at the local level, then why don't they do the same thing, right? If you get a ticket from the North Dakota Highway Patrol, the North Dakota Highway Patrol doesn't see any of that money. It goes to the Common Schools Trust Fund. Thus, there is no financial incentive for the North Dakota Highway Patrol to, well, patrol in a certain way. I think sometimes the revenue part of it, as much as law enforcement officials and politicians and whoever might deny it, the revenue portion of things is a heavy, heavy incentive. We know that government has an unquenchable thirst for revenue, and if they can deploy law enforcement in such a way that maximizes speeding tickets, but maybe isn't, putting public safety as priority number one, then maybe they'll do that if there's a heavy revenue incentive, right? I mean, it's just speeding tickets, and if they're just maximizing the number of speeding tickets they get, then I guess great. That's lots of revenue for the government entity in a situation that isn't like with our state fees where the money goes into a trust fund that must be used for schools. See, we've protected it with those state fines. We've gotten rid of that incentive, that incentive to, as the term goes that gets thrown around a lot in these debates, to police for profit. That incentive's not there anymore. Except it is, because we've opened the door to local governments, charging their own fees and their own fines, and now they're going to keep that revenue because, as a matter of fact, state law not only doesn't require them to put it in the Common Schools Trust Fund. It specifically says those revenues will go to the local entity. Section 40-11-13 of the North Dakota Century Code states that any fines resulting from the violation of municipal ordinance be, quote, paid into the city's treasury. Our local governments now have a heavy incentive to police for profit, and that's a problem. And if we really wanted to believe that this was about safety and not revenue, then the bill passed by the legislature would have required that those revenues also go into some sort of a trust fund used for something other than city government or used for something other than law enforcement. There needs to be a degree of separation there. The point of law enforcement is public safety. The point of law enforcement is to enforce the law. The point of law enforcement is not to raise revenue. And yet when law enforcement benefits from the revenue, when even, the city government, the civilian leaders who are in charge of a given law enforcement agency, a city commission or a county commission, something like, or a sheriff, I guess, if they're seeing revenue on their books that allows them to give raises to their officers or allows them to hire more officers or in any way, I mean, that's an incentive to enforce laws in a ways that maximize fines, that maximize revenues. And that's not what we want. I talked about this recently with DUI policy, and we talk all the time about, the number of DUI arrests, right? How many people have we arrested? And I like to point out all the time that arrests are not the point of DUI policy. Safe roads are. I mean, if you arrest a whole bunch of people, but we have the same number of deaths on the road, what have we accomplished? And I think the same goes here. If you write a whole bunch of speeding tickets, but our roads aren't any safer, then what did we do? Now, we raised a lot of revenue, I guess, and we created a lot of work for cops and a lot of work for the courts. But that's not the point. That's not the goal. The goal is safe roads. So I wish when this bill had passed, again, I don't necessarily have a problem with the local governments being able to assess their own fines. And they say it's not about revenue. They say it's about public safety. And if that's true, then they should have no argument with allocating those funds to something like the Common Schools Trust Fund. And I'm not even saying it has to specifically go to the Common Schools Trust Fund. It just should go somewhere that's separate from the city government, that's separate from the law enforcement agency, so that we don't have that financial incentive to police for profit. Congressman Armstrong, up next. This episode of the Plain Talk Podcast is brought to you by Energy of North Dakota. Oil and natural gas from North Dakota strengthens all of America. And through our abundance of talents, innovations, and technologies, energy responsibly produced here translates to worldwide economic stability. With producers and our communities working together, we're securing a sustainable future that generation after generation can build on. It's all happening right now with Energy of North Dakota. Learn more at energyofnorthdakota.com. Congressman Kelly Armstrong joins me now, as he does every week, to take your questions. You can email those in at any time, rob@sayanythingblog.com, or look for the social media threads I put up on Facebook and Twitter. You can post your comments there as well. Kelly, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Sitting outside City Hall in Watford City. Going to go tour a little bit of this lovely area today. Head up to Williston tomorrow. And on Saturday, I am going to jump in the polar plunge for the Special Olympics in Dickinson.
Oh, man. What a bunch of wimps in Dickinson holding their polar plunge in the spring. If they were tough, they would have done it back during the polar vortex, right?
I have done it in Turtle River and Grand Forks in February, and I'm glad they're doing it in the spring.
Are you? Well, maybe I don't blame you. You get more credit, I think, if you do it in February as opposed to March. If you do it when it's 50 degrees outside, is it really still a polar plunge, or is it just a cold bath?
Well, hopefully it's just a cold bath, but it's for the Special Olympics, so I do it.
It's a good cause. Well, right? Who cares? It's a good cause. That's all that matters. You've been doing a lot of work in North Dakota this week, and I want to ask you about some of it. Senate Indian Affairs Committee, that was yesterday. How'd that go?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually, I was so thankful that Senator Hoven invited us for that hearing, and for me, just learning the federal policy of all this stuff as we just get going, it was nice to be there because we're particularly talking about law enforcement, drug enforcement issues, how we work with the federal government, local communities. So when you're starting off, it's nice to have something that I have a background in, and it actually carried over quite a bit from justice reinvestment, which I was really invested in at the state level. So there's a lot of challenges. We need to continue to work towards getting more resources and dealing with addiction in a smarter way on the reservation, the same way we need to deal with it in a smarter way all across the state.
Now, what did you hear at this hearing? Anything new? Anything that surprised you? I mean, it's not a new issue, right? Not a new issue anywhere. It's not an issue on the reservation. It's not a new issue off the reservation. Although obviously our government to government relationship, I mean, that's a unique circumstance. But you hear anything new? Anything that surprised you?
Yeah, I think two things that are really important. One, the First Step Act that was passed last Congress will disproportionately benefit them because a lot of those crimes go immediately into federal court. And then secondly, and I think this is a big shout out to Governor Burgum. The amount of trust we're starting to gain back at the state level with the various different reservations is going to be really helpful in this. And the reason I say that is because we need to capture these types of crimes, and especially addiction-related crimes, early. By the time you go to prison, there's 3 or 4 chances at minimum where you have an opportunity to intervene either in tribal court or county court, and that takes trust between the state and the reservations because they are sovereign. They have their own jurisdiction, but it's a community effort and everybody needs to help. So those were the two positives. The negatives are it's hard to get BI agents up here if they aren't from here. The turnover rate's a little higher than we'd like it to be. Governor Burgum's got some good ideas about maybe doing a BI training in conjunction with Camp Grafton. So we're at least looking at focusing on some of those things. And nobody knows more about this stuff from the federal level than Senator Hoven and about how to get the appropriate resources where they need to go. So
is that and I know at the state level, Governor Burgum is doing a lot with the state-tribal relationship, and I think he's made wonderful progress. The progress we made on the tax agreement not being, certainly not the least, certainly not an unimportant milestone. Let's put it that way. But do you think that's part of it? Is just getting more interplay between the tribal government and the state government, and also culturally, between the communities on the reservation and the communities off the reservation? Is that just a big? Because sometimes it can feel like our friends on the reservations are sort of out of sight, out of mind in terms of our state government and even our federal government. Frankly, is that sort of the key to this?
Yeah, and I think you got to start from the premise, and I'll just talk about addiction-related crime. Now, the trafficking and the DEA and the FBI, let's be honest, they're pretty good at those things, and we want to continue to deal with that from the trafficking level. But from the addiction-related use crimes, I don't think it's any secret that rural America in general is starved for resources in that area, and I think it's compounded on the reservations. But at the same time, we need. They don't just stay there. They're involved in our communities. They're there. They deal with county law enforcement, county court systems. So, the more communication that we have between everybody, the better. And we always got to remember that they are a sovereign jurisdiction. So, I mean, we have to have permission to go there, and we should. So that's why the trust factor is so high, or is so important.
Yeah, for sure. Now, the other thing is Secretary of Labor Alexander Acosta, that's while you're in Whopperton, he's here to discuss workforce issues and association health plans and that sort of thing. How's that conversation going?
You know, I know Senator Kramer has him here, and actually I have to say a shout-out and a thank you for giving an invite for that, too, but we had already committed to Watford City and Williston, so we couldn't be there. But, I mean, you know, I'm on the Immigration Subcommittee on Judiciary, and one of the most constant calls I get is on farm visa programs, labor visa programs. We need to continue to deal with it. I think it's the single biggest thing in North Dakota, stopping the growth of our economy as a workforce, and we need to meet those challenges both from how we're educating our kids and bringing workers into the state.
I'm an idiot because I thought you told me you were in Whopperton. You told me you were in Watford City. So I thought you were there with Secretary Acosta. And, boy, I got that one wrong. So I apologize for that. I assumed that you were at that meeting. But what do you think the message is Secretary Acosta needs to hear? Because North Dakota, our problem is getting workers here. And as a matter of fact, my guest for a future podcast is going to be a member of one of our workforce councils here in the state who's talking about things the legislature needs to do to bring workers to our state. But that's really, I mean, during the oil boom, before the oil boom, even during the economic lull we had after the oil boom, the challenge North Dakota always faces when it comes to diversifying our economy, growing our economy, is finding people to work. Because everybody here, for the most part, who wants a job, has a job. There's no reason to be unemployed in North Dakota. We got plenty of jobs to go around. It's a chronic labor shortage facing our state. Is there anything Secretary Acosta, the federal government, can do to help us?
I mean, I think that the Trump administration and Governor Burgum have both been big on how, I mean, the first thing is we need to educate our kids in a way that gives them at least the opportunity to stay here, which is one thing that has happened in North Dakota over the last 12 years. And Watford City is probably the perfect example of that. So first and foremost, and that's what, by the way, that's what we heard at the hearings yesterday, too. BIA agents who are from here tend to want to stay here. It's when we bring people from other parts of the country that we end up having really high turnover rates. So, I mean, there's certain factors in North Dakota. We love this state. I mean, we're proud of it. But if you circle it on a map and you're from Atlanta, Georgia, and you look at the temperature in Grand Forks, North Dakota 3 weeks ago, it's a pretty intimidating place to uproot your life and move to. So we have to continue to do that. And I think legal, merit-based immigration has to be a part of that conversation.
I think you're right. That and apparently global warming would really help us out a lot too. All right, all joking aside, let's keep moving here. Democrats, speaking about, the challenges of North Dakota as a small state on the national level, I mean, our state population is a medium-sized city in another state. We don't have a lot of people here. But yet, we're hearing from Democrats nationally, Senator Elizabeth Warren specifically, saying that she wants an end to the Electoral College. Now, this would require amending the Constitution. Do you support that? Do you want to end the Electoral College, go to a national popular vote?
I think that if you ever want to find the difference between Republicans and Democrats, this is it. When Mitt Romney lost the last election, Republicans are like, we got to find a better candidate next time. When Hillary Clinton lost the election, they all want to change the rules. And I don't think you could do anything that would decimate the value of a vote. And more importantly, understanding that we are a constitutional republic and not a democracy. And these checks and balances were set up in place for a very specific reason. And this experiment that is America has been working pretty well. And I think we should continue down the path we're on. No, I don't support it. Not at all.
Yeah. I mean, I've always looked at the Electoral College as required. I mean, look, in 2016, one of the reasons why Hillary Clinton lost the election, she won the national popular vote. She lost the Electoral College vote because she didn't campaign in Wisconsin. And to me, that's a good lesson because you know what? I think candidates should campaign in Wisconsin, in states like Wisconsin, states like North Dakota, frankly. I think anything that requires the candidates to reach out beyond, sort of the densely populated parts of our country is a good thing. And the Electoral College, as evidenced by the outcome of the 2016 election, requires that. It's not just the popular vote. I think the Electoral College, recognizes the fact that, America isn't just a diverse place in terms of population, population density. We're a diverse place culturally and geographically, and I think the Electoral College is a mechanism that requires national candidates to recognize that.
I agree, and I think you can pad your stats by 1 million votes in San Francisco, and that doesn't necessarily relate. And I think from a policy standpoint, it becomes even more important, because if you only concentrate campaigning in consuming states and consuming areas and don't focus your attention in the Midwest and other areas that produce the things that the consuming areas need to live, it's not going to be very many elections before you start seeing really bad policies come out of that type of campaign.
Yeah, North Dakota has, just over 700,000 citizens. How many millions do we feed? How many millions, do we keep the lights on for? How many millions do we help fill up their fuel tanks because of all the production that we're doing here? We may not have a lot of people, but we produce a lot of stuff. Policy, and the policy that affects that is important. And those of us who are on the ground closest to that production should have as much say as anyone else.
And I agree with that. And I think it's even, culturally and philosophically, Rob, it's a little different too. You can take any farm kid from North Dakota and move them into a city, and they'll acclimate in a fairly short period of time. They won't necessarily like it. They will want to maybe go back, or they may really enjoy it. But if you take an inner city kid and move them out into rural America, they have a very difficult time acclimating and understanding how the world works out here. And that's not political. I mean, that's an important distinction to recognize, because we do provide the food and the energy they need to survive.
Certainly. I want to move on here. This is sort of an interesting issue with the border wall. Now, I know you support building the border wall. Our entire federal delegation does. Recent news articles have indicated that some of the funding that President Trump, the situation that we have where we're looking for funding for the border wall, could result in some military projects here in North Dakota losing funding. And specifically, I'm reading, this is a Grand Forks Herald article from Emily Allen from earlier this week. She's writing about a $66 million project to build a helicopter facility at the Minot Air Force Base, a $27 million firing range, and a $32 million National Guard Readiness Center in Fargo for the National Guard Army Reserve. Those are among the roughly 400 projects on the list that could potentially lose funding in order to fund the border wall. Now, some are making some political hay out of this. What say you?
Yeah, I think those articles are going to run in every district all across the country for people that are opposed to the border wall. And obviously, there's different end dates and different start dates for a lot of those projects, but we need to watch those carefully, particularly the helicopter issue in Grand Forks. That's a fiscal year 2019, I believe. So that one for sure we got to continue to fight for. And I'm glad that we have Senator Hoeven and Senator Kramer on the right committees to ensure that we continue to protect that stuff. But the list of potential cuts and the list of actual cuts is a very different list. So we need to continue to work through it and make sure we're protecting the things that are important for our national security and North Dakota.
Well, that's something Senator Kramer said yesterday, is he said the items, because there's like 400 projects on this list. Senator Kramer said, you add up the money that's to be awarded to all these projects, and you're talking about 400% of what's needed for the border wall. So just mathematically, we're obviously not going to cut most of those. I mean, most of those projects are going to be just fine. I think it's just, like you said, protecting the North Dakota projects in the final decision. Now, last question I want to ask. I'm reading this. This is from a roll call article from earlier this week. In it, I'm just going to quote from the lead. One member of the House committee created to address climate change stands out for what he owns. Hundreds of oil and gas wells in North Dakota oil fields worth millions of dollars. Representative Kelly Armstrong, a Republican from North Dakota, received at least $400,000 from those wells and as much as $1.1 million in the previous year, as well as $75,000 in salary from Armstrong Corp., his family's oil and gas business. He also owns at least 289 wells worth between $2.9 million and $11.5 million, though in a recent interview, Armstrong said he owns more than 300 wells. I guess the implication here is that because you have interests in the oil and gas industry, that you shouldn't be on a committee to address climate change. And in fact, North Dakota Democrats, they sent out a press release yesterday that I'm going to read you as well. I'm quoting now from the press release, he's only been in Congress less than 3 months, and Kelly Armstrong is already embracing the swamp. According to roll call, Armstrong was appointed by D.C. Republicans to sit on the Select Committee on Climate Crisis. The committee is responsible for finding solutions to prevent and reverse the effects of climate change and promote energy independence. One would think it would be a good thing for North Dakota to have a voice on combating climate change, but North Dakotans have to wonder if Kelly Armstrong will be putting his interests above theirs. Roll call reports, and then they go on to cite all those figures that I just read to you. So, I mean, clearly Democrats are saying you're not fit to tackle the issue of climate change because you have interest in the oil industry. What say you?
Well, first, there's a lot to unpack there, Rob. First, I got to give a congratulations to the DC media. It took them 2 months to figure out I was in the oil business. My first campaign commercial had an oil well in it. I think I've talked about it for 6 years straight in the North Dakota Legislature, and even after 2 months, they got it wrong. If I owned 300 oil wells, I'd be in a little different situation than I am. What I have is my dad built a business from absolute scratch, and early on, he set up a lot of different things for his kids, which I will always be beneficial to. I have interests under 300 different oil wells, ranging from small to minuscule, but I'm never going to lean away. I'm into this industry that has provided for not only me and my family and my community, but the state and the country. And secondly, I think it's probably pretty good. Well, one, I'll go to the Democratic release. I don't know who they think appoints people to committees in D.C., but it's D.C. Republicans who appoint people to committees in D.C., and I think they should be proud that a freshman from either party from our state got to be on the committee. Thirdly, nobody ever says I can't be involved in criminal justice reform because until December 31st, I was a partner in a criminal justice or criminal defense law firm. It's only the bad industries, apparently, where you have a conflict of interest. We don't tell farmers they can't be involved in ag policy. And fourth, I know the industry pretty well. I know the challenges we face when we're dealing with getting pipe in the ground, both at the federal and the state level, and what we need to do to continue to capture gas and move forward in an economic way that also realizes that we consume a lot of oil in this country, and we're going to continue for the near future. I'm excited to be on the committee. I think climate change is an issue that we're going to continue to address politically from a policy standpoint. I mean, here's some breaking news. The climate's changing, and we have 7 billion people on this planet. We probably have an impact on it, and we should look at addressing some of those issues, but we should do it in a reasonable way that helps continue to feed and fuel our economy.
I guess I just think it's interesting. I mean, sure, we're going to have a debate about climate change. There's going to be policies proposed, policies debated. In that process, don't we want some people with a background in the oil industry? I mean, what's so bad about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, quite frankly, I'm a little disappointed in the North Dakota Democrats press release. I mean, if they were waiting for this to happen, then really, quite frankly, if they think this is an issue, that's political malpractice. They should have been hitting me over the head with it since I announced my candidacy in February. It's no secret that I've been in the oil and gas industry, and it's no secret that I'm proud of the industry. So good for them to get in the game at this time, too, I guess.
Yeah, well, it certainly was an interesting tactic, but, I mean, let's face it, the Democrats haven't exactly been they haven't been exactly raising eyebrows with their stunning electoral victories here in the state of North Dakota of late. Well, that's it. That's all I got for you, Kelly. Thanks for your time, man.
Same time next week. I do think opening day, if we're around that day, we should at least do a 10-minute baseball bet.
You think so? We should just...
Maybe you and I will be the only two that listen to it, but it'd be a little fun.
Oh, but believe me, plenty of people will listen to it. And, yeah, I'm all for it, man. Let's talk baseball. I'm for it.
All right, Rob. Have a great day.
You too. That's it for today's Plain Talk podcast. Remember, new episodes come out Monday through Friday, right away in the morning. Although, you don't have to listen right away in the morning if you don't want to. You can listen whenever you want. You should be able to find the podcast on all of the major podcasting platforms that are out there now. Just search for Plain Talk with Rob Port. There's other podcasts out there named Plain Talk. But if you search Plain Talk with Rob Port, you should be able to find me. If you're having any trouble at all on any platform, I would appreciate, in fact, you letting me know because, I can, check with that platform and see about getting the podcast listed. And B, I can help you find a way to listen in a way that's convenient for you. Also, some of these platforms allow you to rate and review. Apple Podcast, iTunes allows this. Stitcher allows this. If you would leave an honest rating, an honest review of the podcast on those platforms, it really helps raise the notoriety of the podcast, makes it easier to find. So if you would do that, I would sure appreciate it. Also, if you have any feedback on the show, if you want to send in questions for our weekly guests, Senator Kramer and Congressman Armstrong, I would sure appreciate that. Any feedback on the show, just email it all to rob@sayanythingblog.com. Also, follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm easy to find. Just search for Rob Port. Search for Say Anything Blog. There's pages and accounts for both. And follow me. And then say hi, because I like it when people say hi. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.